Hi everybody, John Bailey here, gemstone artist and founder of the International Faceting Academy. We're back with video number 2 of our Resin-tech lap reviews. In this video, we're going to examine the flatness of both the Hyperedge 500 and the Dreamer 800 laps in both radial runout and in flutter. We'll measure with the dial indicator, and we'll also look at the stone on the lap behavior while we're looking at the rate of removal in cutting. And we're going to do that on both synthetic corundum and on sunstone. We're also going to take a close-up look at the facet beside facet comparisons of the finish left by each of these laps. Obviously, you've got a lot of stock removal here, and ordinarily I would not use these laps for this purpose. I would use a 260 to knock this way down. We're going to do this just to look at movement, rate of movement in removing this material, and then what does our finish look like, and then we'll even do some pre-polish and have a look at what the progression looks like. And I'll just do that part of the way down just for demonstration purposes. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at our dial indicator when we put the stone against the lap. I've got my depth set up and everything so we can make, there's our contact with the lap right there. And the first thing we can look at, I've got the stone on the lap in the closest position to the lap nut at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to drag the stone across the lap, and this is going to let us see how flat the lap is from the closest position to the nut all the way to the outer edge. This is a very, very sensitive dial indicator, and you can see, once again, I'm against the lap here, a very, very tiny amount of movement from right next to the lap nut all the way to the outer edge. I'm going to wet the lap up a little bit and give us 50% speed or so on our facetron, and then with some moderate pressure, let's see what happens. Okay, so we've swapped the Hyperedge 500 for the Dreamer lap. This is now on the Dreamer, and I'm setting our stone as close to the lap nut at 3 o'clock as practical. And there's our depth. I'm going to drag the stone across the lap to the outer edge. And that'll give us some indication. We can see that the stone is going further down as we're dragging it outward. And that indicates the lap is a little bit domed. It's not horrible. We don't hate it. It's just something to be aware of. So let's look at rate of removal and also at dial flutter. We're going to turn the lap at about the same speed, about 50% speed on the facetron. And here's our cutting rate of removal. That's clearly a little bit faster. Here's our macro view of the facets that we just cut on synthetic corundum. The left-hand facet was cut on the Dreamer 800 lap. The right hand of those two facets was cut on the Hyperedge 500. So they're actually quite comparable. It's not super apparent that that 500 Hyperedge is leaving a slightly better finish. I'm not sure it is on this corundum, but we would definitely need to pre-polish between this finish and a polish on corundum either way. One of the things we can notice here is that the hardness direction through this corundum, the 500 Hyperedge fell on a hard surface right here. And so we had slower cutting, and it left this shinier, almost wanting to orange peel facet. Not quite though. The Hyperedge, the 500 doesn't tend to do that, at least not in any of the experiments that I conducted. So we can see some undercutting here on this 800 Dreamer lap, which is the right-hand facet. Again, neither of these is a problem because both of these need to go to a pre-polish stage before we polish from this kind of cutting on the corundum. Here we are with our sunstone test piece on our 500 Hyperedge lap, and we're going to do a fairly significant amount of removal in this piece. I'm going to handle this right-handed the same way I did the other one so we can see the rate of removal. Just for the record, I wouldn't ordinarily do this much roughing with this lap. I would preform this with something more coarse. Really quick, this is the amount of material that we removed in that period of time. And this is a good sized stone. This is about a 14 millimeter long oval. So we're going to swap the laps out and do the similar amount of stock removal on using our Dreamer 800, and we'll have a comparison. So we'll take off the same amount of material, same lap speed. Let's see what happens. So clearly, the Dreamer 800, even though it's called an 800, clearly it's removing material significantly faster than the 500. And here's our macro shot of the two side-by-side facets showing the kind of surface damage that we're getting from these two different laps. So clearly you can tell which is which. The Dreamer is on the left, the Hyperedge is on the right. The Hyperedge will allow us to go directly from that finish to polish. The Dreamer 800 is just a little bit coarse to do that. We're not gonna have a good time if we do that. It's gonna take us far too long. The Hyperedge is gonna facilitate that hyperspace jump directly from a reasonably fast cutting lap to a polish. This is the finish left on an Oregon sunstone by the Hyperedge 500. This is the Ed Perry product, Hyperedge 500. This thing cuts about like a really well-worn 600 metal bond lap, but it leaves a finish that's closely comparable to the Resin-tech 600 red lap that we usually use for pre-polish for materials of this kind. So what we're finding is that we can go directly from this 500 Hyperedge lap to quickly cutting, from that directly to polishing. And although this looks like there's some damage here, we can see, for instance, along this really sharp keel, that we're not getting any chipping of the kind we might get with even like a 1200 metal bond. We're just not seeing that kind of chipping here. Our facet junctions are really sharp along the margins of our girdle, along all the facet junctions on the pavilion, and even along this really sharp, and this is a pretty sharp knife-edged culet. And we can look really close and see that there's no chipping along there. We're going to get a nice, smooth keel culet going directly to polish. And we'll be back in a bit to show what that polish looks like. This is our Oregon sunstone. It's about a 14 millimeter long oval. And you can see that this design has pretty good size facets. This is taken directly from the Hyperedge 500 to 14,000 voodoo on Corian, and what looks like stripes or streaks or scratches here, this is actually schiller inside the stone. You can see this going across about 3 facets here on the end. But this is directly from the 500, Ed Perry's Hyperedge 500 to 14K Black Magic on a Corian lap. This is satisfactory, very satisfactory work. I think it took a little bit longer than we would spend if we were graduating to the same polish from, let's say, an old Resin-tech New Bond 600, one of the red New Bond laps. This took just a little bit longer. I think we spent, on these larger facets, like these guys right here, we probably spent up to 30 seconds to polish one of those, to bring it all the way below the damage down to a full polish. But that's not a super amount of time, and given that we're skipping a pre-polish step, that's a pretty rapid progression for finishing a stone, and we're pretty happy with that. Thanks for checking out our review of Resin-tech cutting laps. Make sure to watch the other videos in our Resin-tech review series. If you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe so you'll get notice of new content. And remember to visit the website at facetingacademy.com, where you'll find more free faceting content. While you're there, you can join the members area to support our work and also get access to exclusive members content like unreleased faceting designs and more detailed and advanced training materials. You might even decide to reserve a seat in one of our live training events. See you there.